Next in our series, Unsung Heroes or Less Well-Known Heroes. And Mordecai, you'll notice my wife has put this beautiful carpet here as a prop. It's not from Persia, but it could be. We bought it on the first morning of the first day of our trip and then carried it all around Turkey and Greece. But she haggled very hard. Looks nice, it was quite heavy. So obviously, as we saw in the video, the setting of the place is Persia, modern day Iran, and not all the Jews went back to Israel, and we're looking at some of the Jews that stayed, particularly Mordecai and Esther. So the video basically shows what a great literary work the book is. And the last little book shows the parallelism leading right up to the sort of climactic change. And it's hard to get a good video on Esther because most of them are done for children. And we might talk a bit about that later. So I'm just going to skip through the story. And if you get to something that you think is a lesson for you from Morty, Go Morty was one of the videos. If you get to a lesson that you think might be worth sharing, please sing out. There's no reason why my insight should be the only ones we talk about. So sing out if we get to something that you think is a real insight for you. So first, a quick sidetrack. I just want to jump forward a few thousand years. And this is the city of Hamadan in Iran, about 330 kilometres to the west of the capital, Tehran. And you'll see this sign. So I sent this sign to my Jewish friends, my Hebrew scholars, and I said, what does this say? And they said, it says the tomb of Esther and Mordecai, but they said, I don't think it can be real because they didn't think that existed in Israel. And I said, it's not in Israel, it's in Iran. And they said, that can't be right. There's no way there'd be a Hebrew sign in Iran. But there is. And if you follow the signs, you'll come to this little humble building. And until a few years ago, you had to trek through a little dirt track between houses to find this entrance. It's a very old, very solid stone door that you can see. How big is it? Well, that guy's not 9 foot tall. He's a normal size. So they left the door as it was in order to make people bend down to get in because it's a shrine. There we are in the shrine, and you'll find there, supposedly underneath those cloths, these sarcophagi, which are said to hold the remains of Esther and Mordecai. Well, I guess Hamadan in ancient times was called Ecbatana, and it held the summer palace of the royals for that period, including Xerxes. Tradition has it that at the end of their lives, Mordecai and Esther spent their days there, died, and were buried. How far back? Well, we've got some evidence from the 8th century, which is still 1200 or so years later. People started coming there as a pilgrimage. Iranian Jews would come there, and it was starting to be documented as the place. It was destroyed in the 14th century and then rebuilt, and the last renovation started in the 1970s. Interestingly, they were asked to take down a part of the wall which had a Star of David, but on the roof, which you can't see, is a giant Star of David, which you can see from Google Earth. So the Islamic Republic of Iran has a big Star of David. So it's possible, it could be. And Iranian Jews go there for Purim, the festival where they celebrate what happened there with Esther and Mordecai. But also for bar mitzvahs and just for a spiritual pilgrimage. It's a place they go. In fact, Iranian Jews call themselves the children of Esther. They could easily call themselves the children of Mordecai, couldn't they? So, the Persian Empire. David told us all about the Persian Empire. They didn't get to conquer the world by being nice people. We've got a huge, vast and cruel empire. From Pakistan all the way out to Africa. It's a huge empire. Jews were generally not thought well of and not treated well. So we've got Mordecai living as a captive, an exile, a foreigner in a strange and hostile land. So 486 BC, Xerxes comes to power, son of Darius, grandson of Cyrus. There's Xerxes as a stone carving, far too boring for Hollywood. This is how they did him, if you've seen 300. So Mordecai's there living as a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin, quietly, although he's in a hostile land, faithfully doing his job, without much recognition. Now, tradition says that Esther's parents died when she was very young. So maybe a baby, maybe an infant, maybe a very small child. And Mordecai raised her as his own. Has anyone done that? It's tough, isn't it? It's tough raising kids who are your own. Remember, Mordecai's not wealthy, he's not prominent, he's got problems of his own. But he steps up to the plate, doesn't he? He takes family seriously and he raises Esther as his own. Our children were easy to raise. They were a delight. Or maybe Karen did all the work. They're both possible. But how hard would it be to raise your cousin, essentially? But he did. He discipled her. He mentored her through those tough years where they think they know better, to make her a godly woman. So there's some things to admire, isn't it? As inconvenient and challenging as parenthood is, he took that on. So he told her to hide her Jewishness and to use her Persian name, Esther, rather than her Jewish name. The Persian name Esther means, there's a clue in this picture. Star. Wow, isn't that interesting? So she hid her Jewishness under the advice of her sort of mentor, dad figure. Very wise. And what's happening here? It's a Jewish cartoon, so you read it sort of the opposite direction to what we do. So Mordecai is overhearing the two guards and their plot to assassinate the king, and he tells Esther. He could have told the king himself, but he tells Esther. Again, pretty wise. It cements Esther's place in the palace. So these guys are guards. They've got access. It's a bit like the Secret Service plotting to kill the president, if you like. And then what recognition does he get? None. Is he okay with that? Does he bring it up every day? He seems to be okay with that. He continues to work faithfully, visiting Esther, continuing to mentor her, but content without recognition. So what's happening here? He's not bowing. So the Hebrew word is to sort of lie on your face, prostrate. So you're supposed to prostrate. I usually use the other one. Like you're supposed to Haman. Reminds you of someone? You might have seen this picture. Remember this picture? Does anyone know the story about this picture? Dave?
Launching a submarine in the Nazi Germany, and that was a form of protest. He could have been in prison for that.
It's fascinating. If you Google it, 95% of the references say this guy was a guy called Auguste because his daughter identified him first. And it's a great story. He fell in love with a Jewish woman and he was imprisoned, and towards the end of the war they forced prisoners to fight, and he died in the war. Great story, but it's not him. The true story is a guy who actually did work there, a guy called Birgit Gustav, who did work there. And why is his story not out there? Because he was a Christian. So, and he wasn't imprisoned and murdered. He lived till long after the war. But it's fascinating how the internet likes one version of the story. But if you study pictures of the two guys, it was clearly not August, but Birgit. So, the text says that he would not bow down and that he was not afraid. There's courage there, isn't there? So who is this Haman the Agagite? So Agag was the king of the Amalekites. Remember 1 Samuel 15, what was Saul's job? And clear instructions? Wipe out everything. And don't take anything. And the famous scene where Samuel comes to Saul and he says, "What is this bleating of sheep and lowing of cattle that I hear?" What happened? Saul spared the king and probably others, and he spared everything, the text says, everything that he liked, everything that was attractive to his eye. He only destroyed that which was very poor quality or crappy. And Saul's desperately trying to sort of say how he's obeyed and that he's going to have these animals sacrificed. And this is where Saul says to obey is better than sacrifice. So from that time, essentially, Saul's judged, isn't he? And what does Samuel do? Tough job being a prophet. He hacks Agag to death, cuts him into little pieces in front of everyone. It's a tough job, isn't it? But there were serious things afoot. And if Saul had done his job, there would be no Haman. Is it a stretch to imagine that Haman knew his family history? That he knew that his ancestors were killed by Jews, maybe? There's intense hatred there for the Jews from Haman, isn't there? And it sort of makes sense when you know the story. So, Haman wants to kill them all the Jews in the whole kingdom, and confiscate all their stuff. And to compensate the king for lost taxes, he offers him 375 tons of silver for the royal treasury. And the king goes along with it, which results in great mourning. So Mordecai mourns, he laments publicly. And you've got to remember, this isn't just Haman as a man trying to do this. There's an enemy behind it who wants to kill God's people. So Haman tries to destroy the Jews, and Mordecai laments. Sackcloth and ashes, publicly. What we often do is we celebrate publicly and then we mourn privately, don't we? Which can isolate us. So Mordecai goes to Esther and he encourages her, literally, to put courage into her. And what's the powerful phrase he uses? Perhaps you've come to this place for such a time as this. It's interesting, the bit that comes just before it. He is absolutely convinced that God is going to look after his people. But if you're not careful, you can miss out on that deliverance. So he says to Esther, if you remain silent and miss out on your opportunity to be God's agent, you can be destroyed. God will deliver us another way. But maybe, just maybe, you've been brought to this place and this position just for this moment. So he's trusting God. He has an absolute certainty in God's deliverance provision. But he's not passive, is he? He's ready to act. He's ready to take action to be part of it. And what did Esther say? She's going to go, but she wants them to fast and pray. And do you think they fasted and prayed? They did. So she screws up her courage. This is a nice depiction of it in a movie, just thinking about that act of boldly going to the king without being summoned. and that sort of imagines what it might be like. So, what is that about? So, after the banquets, Haman is dealt with, and your versions might say hung, but it can equally mean to be impaled on a stake. Apologies to the kids for that gruesome scene before. So Haman is dealt with, but it still leaves the decree. Now, kings can make decrees, but they can't undo decrees, and it's tough. And this is to represent the third way. So remember in Daniel when the young noblemen, the Jews, were told to eat from the king's table? And it looked like they had a dilemma. They either break their law and eat from the king's table, or they don't and get in big trouble. It's like a dilemma. Only two options, and each one is bad. So what did Daniel do? He found a third way. He thought, okay, what is their motive in asking us to eat from the king's table? They want us to be healthy. So he came up with that experiment about allowing them to eat their own food and seeing who's the healthiest. And in business, in problem solving, even in ethics, they talk about finding the third way. When what it looks like is a dilemma, find the third way. So Mordecai is thinking, okay, we've got this decree, people to kill the Jews, so what can we do? So he came up with this decree. And what was it about? You can fight back. In fact, you should fight back. You should get together, you should prepare, and you should defend yourself. And it went from a sort of a politically correct thing to join the fight to now being a politically correct thing to defend them. And we can see here that the rulers of the provinces, the lieutenants, the deputies, the officers helped the Jews. So who would possibly fight? Who would try to kill? If you're just an ordinary person, you would stay home that day, or you would fight to defend them, wouldn't you? Who would go out to kill them? Haman's. Why? They really, really hate the Jews. So the ones who fought were the ones who really, really wanted to wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. So as you know, the Jews banded together. So in Susa, the capital, on the first day, 500 were killed. And then the king allowed a second day and another 300 were killed. Across the whole empire, 75,000 people who set out to kill the Jews were themselves killed. Now, in Iranian history, this is a massacre of innocent Iranians by Jews. Ironically, isn't it? But the Jews took no plunder, even though they were free to take plunder. Why didn't they take any plunder? That was not their purpose, was it? They're not doing it for gain. They're doing it for survival, weren't they? So, Mordecai makes the second proclamation. The Jews kill those who would kill them, and the Feast of Purim is established. And that last little epilogue about Mordecai ruling with great justice and goodness would help that most of your fierce enemies are dead. But he ruled for the good of all, so he sort of overcame bitterness. And he knew the importance of remembering and celebrating. So he said, let's set up this celebration, this feast, and let's always remember. So as it said, the book of Esther doesn't mention the name of God, but there's no doubt really that he's the main character, isn't it? If you think of all the things that are woven together, all the little details, the king's insomnia, the particular passage of the Chronicles that is read, overhearing the plot, all of these tiny little coincidences that show the hand of a great designer. Were there other things that struck people about Mordecai?
He knew that God would save them. He was just giving Esther the opportunity to be the person God used.
Yes, that's powerful, isn't it? Absolute certainty that God would act, but also aware of the opportunity to actually be part of the answer to your own prayers and in on God's adventure, God's work in the world, or else you might miss out. Yeah? Anything else that struck people?
I think Mordecai's courage to stand up to Haman and say, "No, I won't bow to you." That's pretty.
Why wouldn't he bow?
Pretty major. Because he didn't. Bowing was an act of worship.
Yeah, and
And a Jew wouldn't worship.
you shall have no other gods but me. Okay, yeah, powerful, isn't it? Anything else?
Well, the thing that stands out is often we sort of hear that to worship God is to talk about God all the time. To honour God is to just be out there, blazing shirts. I love God, I love Jesus, and all that. But here's an example of loving God, following God without saying it, but doing it. And that's as powerful as saying it.
Yep. Yep. Faith in action, isn't it? Okay. Remember this. So the Persian Empire must have seemed like this great sort of invincible entity. But remember Daniel and the dream about the statue with the kingdoms? So the head was the kingdom of Babylon, which flourished for a period. Then the Medo-Persians, then Greece. Xerxes spent most of his time sort of fighting the Greeks, plotting and planning and having different campaigns against the Greeks. And then they had their time and the Romans came. And what happens in the end there? In the time of the legs of iron comes a rock made not from human hands. What does it do? Smashes them all down and sets up an eternal kingdom. And in a sense, that happened in the time of the Romans. The rock came, the kingdom of God was begun. So it can seem like this great all-powerful entity, Persia, but it's really just a part of the puzzle that God has his hands all over. So I said before that most of the Purim, most of the Esther videos are for children. And if you're a child growing up in Israel, you learn about Purim. So we learn about it sort of maybe in Sunday school, about other Old Testament stories. Or for a Jewish child, you grow up learning about this. And so it must be for our kids a little bit like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus. So they have these little puppets, these little plays, little finger puppets. And what are they eating there in the corner there, John? Haman's ears. It's just a thing that they make, and some of our friends made them for us. They're quite delicious. They are yummy. So there they are. It's like a children's story, isn't it? One-dimensional characters. The Queen, Mordecai, Haman, they're sort of like these one-dimensional characters. And people wear these masks, so you can be characters, and they have this melodrama. Every time Haman comes on stage, everyone boos. When Morty comes on, they go, "Go Morty."
We should do that next week.
Yeah. But as well as these masks, they wear these masks. And here's a Jewish family going to Purim celebrations. Well, I'm not sure what those little twins at the front are. What impression does it create?
Party.
Yeah, it's a party. Yeah, so which characters in the story are these? What's that? That's fantasy, isn't it? So here you've got history mingled with fantasy told as a children's story. So what impression does that give?
It's not real.
Yeah, it's like the Easter Bunny or Santa Claus, isn't it? And so when Jews grow into adulthood and they celebrate Purim, they want to have a party with their kids and they let them dress up as C-3PO or something, whatever they want. Can you see how hard it is for them to get the adult message? Here's were some of the lessons that I got. And you might have gotten other ones. It's said that there are no miracles in Esther. What do you think of that?
Must have their eyes closed.
The whole thing is a miracle, isn't it? The whole thing is a miracle. So, those who set out to wipe out the Jews get wiped out. Everyone intent on killing the Jews, full of hatred. Someone has said, you want evidence for the existence of God? The perseverance of the Jews. Very powerful. So the adult lessons for us, things like that. And when you walk into work, it is for such a time as this. When you walk into school or the shops, when you walk out your front door, all your experiences come together to make you who you are, potentially God's agent for such a time as this. Let's pray.